are like-minded and are growing their careers and are thinking about how others can also expand their careers. I'm a true believer in mentorship and collaborations and are learning from each other in personal relationships. And I think, early in my career, I often thought as leaders, because we put leaders at a very high level as people who had, like positional rank and authority, and of course, impressive titles like president and CEO and founder and, executive and even commander in chief. And so many women, it seemed to me, started to think about leadership as in aspirational terms related to a future job. And of course, we're all willing to work hard to get to that future job. But the more I lived and the more experience I had, and the more I thought about what is leadership, I think there's nothing wrong with having aspiration for leadership, to have a seat in the table, and to think of it really very early on in your career, right? To know that we actually are all leaders in some way, right? And we have many opportunities to be leaders. And in each stage of our lives, to find the place where we can lead, to recognize, what are some of the building blocks of leadership, and to really lean in to thinking of yourself as a leader, even if the bandwidth is small, if it's voluntary, if it's with a nonprofit, if it's even as how you raise your children. So I think it's very important for us to instill in young women the fact that they are leaders early on. You don't have to wait to get that big positional job to be a leader, but you can think of yourself and really build bigger leadership skills as you go along. So, I'll talk about what I think are some of the building blocks of building your leadership brand. But I guess, as Jennifer said, I'll talk a bit about my journey. My journey has been very different, and it's taken many turns. It started out with one goal in mind, and eventually that grew. So I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, and actually I came into the working world without initially thinking about going to college, right? I took a year of a gap year after high school, and actually worked in a community engagement organization. It was during Johnson's war on poverty, and I worked for a neighborhood community organization that really helped the community people get the things that they needed from the city government, from social services and whatnot, and often from landlords who weren't keeping their buildings. And so one of the first lessons I learned as I started into leadership was that we had a reason to picket City Hall, right? And as young protesters, I went with a large group of people from the community, because we wanted the mayor to know that some of the work that was promised wasn't happening. And so I went down to City Hall. My mother happened to work in City Hall because she was in one of the social services agency. And as we protested and made a lot of noise, her supervisor happened to see me there because he knew me. And when I got home that night, my mother told me, she says, so, how did the picket go? And I said, oh, it was really great. We got their attention, but they haven't agreed to anything. We're going to come back tomorrow. And she said, well, my supervisor told me that if he saw you on the picket line tomorrow, I am going to be fired. And I was like, whoa, okay. So what should I do? I'm like this 17-year-old person. And she says, that's not my job to tell you what you should do. You have to make that decision. But whatever decision that you make, I will, support you in it. And literally, I kept asking her questions, and she kept saying, like, you're 17 years old, you can make decisions for yourself. And as I thought about it at night, and all that I had learned in this community organizing, I decided to go and picket. And we went down, there were hundreds of us, and I actually saw my mother leave the building with her cardboard box because she was fired, right? And when I got home, she said, um, I've never been prouder of you. This was a proud moment. You made the right decision to stand up for your values, and you took a risk. And I tell that story early because one of the things that I've learned about myself is that I value risk taking, right? I recognize that anything that is really important to me, that I really want, that I have to be willing to recognize that there's some risk with it. And my tolerance for risk is pretty good. And so that's one of the values that I have. And as I think about my career, throughout the career, it really has been taking a risk. Sometimes it's a big risk, sometimes it's a small risk. But I often think that the best way of looking at it is to figure out, as my mother said, yeah, what if you fail? What's the worst that can happen? And the other thing is then, what if you succeed? What do you gain from all of that that energy, and where does it take you to the next stage? So I can think of throughout my career, each time when I decided to take a risk. I had a real big interest when I did go to college in being in consumer marketing, and the only thing I wanted to do was to work at Procter and Gamble, right? And I remember marketing was my major, and everybody who knew me knew, whether it was in my bachelor's degree or my MBA program, well, Iris wants to work for Procter and Gamble. She wants to be a maven marketer, et cetera, et cetera. And I was the first person on campus at the recruiting office when they came in. Of course, this is in the 70s. I got a lot of flack from that from my colleagues because they said, I was at the University of Southern California, well, you're Black and a woman in the 70s, right? And you're going to get all the jobs. And I'm like, well, how many can I get? Right? I can only get one good job. But in any case, I got the offer, and it was invited to Procter and Gamble to interview, and all of the thing, and had an offer. And one of the things that happened that also changed my course is that one of my professors, someone who I actually had not gotten along well with because he thought I was very opinionated and I spoke up, and he wasn't used to that much engagement. He called me into his office and he said, "So I hear you got the Procter and Gamble job." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "Well, we've never had a lot of conversations, but I've observed you a lot." And he says, "I know it's your dream come true, but I actually don't think it's the best job for you." And I was like, "Why?" He says, "Because you're very opinionated, you're very outspoken, and you want to introduce innovative eyes all the time, ideas. And the reality is that Procter and Gamble has a very well-designed formula for how it does marketing, how it develops brand. And as you come in, you go through steps in the brand management um, system, and you don't get to have that much freedom. And I actually think you will be pretty bored and or problematic as display your talents in a way that's nothing wrong with it, but doesn't necessarily fit their corporate culture. And, I had to sit there a moment and say, now this is someone who I never really got along with. I don't know that well, but has taken an interest in me. And he said, least you think I'm just trying to talk you out of something that's really important. I think there's another opportunity for you that will actually fit better into your goals and allow you more flexibility, but also the same training and marketing that you wanted from Procter and Gamble, and will also allow you to stay in a better environment than Cincinnati, Ohio, which it hasn't changed much since then. You know, the racial tension in Cincinnati is pretty great. And so he gave me a ticket to go to San Francisco, and he had a former student of his who he says they're interested in talking to you. Nothing required. If you want the job and they offer it, you take it. You still have the Procter and Gamble. But I just wanted you to know that, there's some things about you that are unique and that you don't want to ever lose sight of them, right? And you don't want to compromise on them. And actually, I ended up taking the job and having a career that was different. Initially, I was with Procter and Gamble had spun off the Clorox company, and so there was full of Procter and Gamble people who had now been moved to California and had a whole different lifestyle in a different way. So I learned the um, the style of marketing that I wanted. But then I also, within a couple of years, moved into the California wine industry. And it was a whole different world, right? And it also was with a large corporation, Hugh Blind, that was changing the way we thought of alcoholic beverages. So in my mind, I thought, I'm really taking forward with me one of the elements that I learned early on. Are you willing to take some risks? Are you willing, to step off of the beaten path? And does also your ability to demonstrate who you are and how you lead really fuel your future by having others, you know, galvanize behind you, become a partner in helping you, build your career. So I always encourage people to think about, who they have as their colleagues, their mentors, their sponsors, and really to think about how that can help you move on to a different level of your career. And for me, I guess when I think about what are the building blocks of, uh, I call it sort of your leadership brand, it's a number of things. It's what do you value? What are the talents that you have? What are you passionate about? What are the ideas you want to be known for? What are your strengths? And what's the capital that you have that you can use? And so I've used that as sort of the guideposts as I've gone through my career. And as I've thought about what is the next turn in my career, when I left California and I moved to Chicago, I moved into a whole different world. In this case, when I joined um, Citibank, we were part of a group that was thinking outside of the box and thinking about how do we change a New York bank into a global player, and how do we leverage an opportunity that had come to us with um, the crash of savings and loans. We had bought, like, I don't know, 12 banks in 12 different states around the country. And we were trying to knit them together to be a national chain and a national brand of Citibank. And joining that group was the next stage in looking at a different way of looking at your consumer, a different corporate culture, and a different way to bring my talents to the table. And one of the things that I try to remain true to was, banking, we've got a banker here, right? Banking can be very stuffy and, very linear in its thinking. And I was fortunate to join the bank at a time when the CEO, who also had a marketing background, had the theory that marketers could be taught banking, but bankers could not be taught marketing. And so, in adjusting to the culture that was there, um, I felt no pressure to necessarily, wear the flannel suit, but to really bring my authentic person as a marketer, the flair that you had for marketing, and the interest that you had in the marketplace. And it also joined at a time when we had more access to analytics. And so one of the things in that career that I was most proud of was the ability to use, for instance, when we bought all of these banks, savings and loans across the country, one of the things that had been part of, because it was, federal legislation that allowed it to happen, that banks could buy a savings and loan in another state. We were prohibited from what I would call cross-selling. So you couldn't say to a checking account customer, do you want a credit card? And you couldn't say to a credit card customer from the New York bank, do you want a checking account? And we knew that eventually those rules would go away, and we were doing a lot of lobbying, advocacy, public policy, encouragement to make that happen. And so one of the things that we did was to take we had like 25 million bank card customers, and to use the demographics, and we had their spending patterns. We knew a lot of information about them. And another way of bringing in the bank in California that had been a savings and loan, where there was a lot of morale that was suffering because they had lost, their ownership and now was part of Citibank. We used this ability to say to every branch, every president of the local market, that we can tell you within your community something about customers that you're not getting that live within 5 miles of your bank. And so we started using very creative analytics to bring people to the table, to think about how leaders who were not culturally into working for a New York bank could actually build their business. And so that was one of the first things I did. And then I also worked for the Global Consumer Bank. And I tell this story only to say that I was having a fabulous time at Citibank. We were doing great work. We had lots of movement. At that time, we were one of the largest. I think we were back and forth between Bank of America and who was the biggest. And I was being and feeling very successful there. But because we were a global bank and I had the opportunity to work with a lot of our international clients and to, do meetings and whatnot abroad, I was starting to feel itchy and thinking that I want to also move abroad and take an assignment. And one of the first times that I raised my hand and said, well, I've been here X number of years and I think I want an assignment and I want to move to Tokyo. I want to move to Japan. And I was really surprised with the reaction that I got. The story was, well, Irish, you don't speak Japanese and we can't send you to China because you don't speak Chinese. And this was at a time when Asia, especially Japan, was eating us for lunch, right, in terms of business acumen and growth. And I wanted to be where the action was. And people kept telling me at Citibank, well, you don't want to ruin your career. You don't want to go and be unsuccessful. And I never could figure out what being unsuccessful looked like. And the conversation always was, you don't speak Japanese. Why don't we send you to Europe? Well, I'd already lived in Europe. Why don't we send you to, oh, you're very nice. You're very outgoing. Why don't we send you to Brazil? And I said, well, I don't do the samba and I don't speak Portuguese. So that's not a place I should go either. And with that thought, I realized that, again, going back to risk taking, that I really wanted to do something. I really wanted to live in Japan. And I wanted to do it then, not 10 years from now, or not when the bank decided that I should go. I knew that this was the perfect time in my perfect life to do that. And so I said no to the offer to go to Europe, no to the offer to go to Brazil, and decided that I would take a leave of absence for a year and go to Japan. And I thought, well, I can afford it. I will do what I want. And at least, if nothing else, I'll get the cultural experience that I want. Maybe I'll think about what's next in life and let that be something that I've accomplished because it's what I wanted. And so I took the year, I went to Japan. And as I thought, what I realized is that what I was being measured on was the experience that other leaders in the organization had had, where they had not been successful, where they didn't feel comfortable in the other culture, and where they genuinely didn't want me to fail. But on the other hand, they also felt that I probably would fail because um, a Black woman in Japan, well, they didn't think they would be too friendly to me. And so what I actually found when I went there, that there were lots of opportunities, many international companies and many Japanese companies that were trying to build their business or grow their business, or move their business to Japan, who had an interest in someone who deeply understood marketing. I also recognized that, and this is a funny story, that they weren't quite sure what to do with me, right? She's got a business, because that's what I did. I started a business like a month or two after I got there. And they said, well, who is she like? She's like those American businessmen who come over, who are all white businessmen, right? And so what I had as my experience in Japan was the Japanese treating me like an American or a European white businessman. And I learned, right? If you haven't lived like a white man, you really haven't lived. But again, it was one of these situations where I was willing to take a risk, right? And willing to do something that others were telling me not to do. And I would have missed so much. And some of the things that I learned there, I learned not only how to do business in another culture, I learned a lot about my own American culture, right? I also learned to navigate in different ways. So, at the time that we're talking about, the Japanese still had, it's a very homogeneous country. And everybody looks alike, and they have norms, and most people graduate from college, they go to a university that's associated with an industry, they get a job, and they stay forever. And so foreign businesses in Japan have difficulty recruiting Japanese people. So that was another niche for me, that I could come in and work with the Japanese employees that they did hire. But also, landlords didn't want to, if an executive came from the US or Europe, and they're going to be there on a 3-year rotation, they didn't want to rent them a home or something like that, and they were constantly being rejected. And it was very hard. I had a friend who couldn't understand why, when she went to an onsen and got into the tub, the onsen bath, that all the Japanese got out. And she was celebrating her birthday. She was a female, white female from California. And we were on a train, and I'd asked her how was her vacation for the weekend. And she told me, that it hadn't been pleasant. People hadn't been pleasant to her. And she said, you know, I can't imagine living in a country where you're treated differently and poorly because of your race or your gender. I can't imagine that at all. And it was one of those moments when you're like, uh-huh, having that conversation. But I had lived places where I had had people who didn't want to rent or sell to me, store clerks that don't want to sell on me. And so I brought some of the cultural elements that I had to Japan. And suddenly, when I saw it happen to you and you and you, and you don't look like me, right? It became non-personal. It became a bigger issue. It became more of that person's issue. So that's one of the great experiences. I only went for a year. I stayed for 9, but who's counting? But I think, again, from a perspective of leadership, it was having the confidence that you can do something and not letting anyone tell you no. So one of the first, I had 2 interesting opportunities when I first moved there. A Japanese friend that I had talked to and, used to see when we did business, when I would go to Japan for business, he said, I have this client. He was a consultant. I've been trying to get business from him for years and we never get any place. Why don't you come along on the call? So I went, and it was the holding company for Kraft. So they had Kraft Foods and Philip Morris and a number of other brands. And the person that we met with was um, a Japanese senior manager, and they had an he didn't speak English, so he said in the meeting, but he was asking questions of the friend that had brought me along, and they were answering it in Japanese, but he can read body language, and you just know it's not what this guy wants to hear. And at one point, and I've been there maybe about a month, I'm thinking, I know why he's not getting any business. He is not giving this guy what he wants. So I figured if this guy was reporting to the president of that corporation in Japan, who was an American, then he spoke English, right? He just didn't want to speak English in that room. So I said to him, Tamaka-san, I said, excuse me, I've only been here for a short time. I speak no Japanese. I'm terrible, so excuse me, but I think you actually speak a lot of English. And I wanted to sort of drill down a little bit more on that question that you asked. And he looked at me and he sort of nodded. He still didn't speak any English. And so I gave him another way of looking at it. And he said, thank you. And we talked a little bit more. And I let my friend go back and we left. And a week later, I got a call from my friend and he says, well, here's the good news and the bad news. I said, well, what's the good news first? He says, they want you to come and take a consultant. They know that you know what they want, but they don't want me. And I was like, well, that's unfortunate. And the unfortunate part was, he said, nope, you're right. They know what you want or what you can offer. I don't do it. And you would be better at it. So again, I think it was a willingness to take risks. That's a value, to feel measured about the risks that you're going to take, and to be very thoughtful about it. So that's something that I've tried to use throughout my career. And I'm sort of jumping all around. This room doesn't look like it needs a lot of coaching
Well, and
on
Iris,
leadership.
if well, we do, right? That's why we're all here. Because we can all be better. I think this group is always striving to improve themselves. But I maybe what we can do, Iris, if this works for you, is just kind of open up the floor to questions. And I'd be okay if you have a question, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Iris. I mean, we can kind of have an open conversation for the last 10 minutes or so, because Iris does have a board meeting following this, so we want to make sure we let her off in plenty of time to prepare for that. So
Yeah, I'd love to talk.
yeah,
I'd love to talk to these women. Great.
who would like to go first? Margot?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. How did you determine what to do about these things that they thought were going to be a problem for you? How did you manage to not get yourself bogged down in that, and then to just kind of rise above it and decide that it's just somebody's opinion?
Yeah, in a number of ways that I did that. First, you have to have a lot of trust in yourself, right? And I think part of the trust is if you're going to follow your path and you're going to follow the way you want to do it, are you okay with the fact that it might fail? And what does the failure mean for you? And I think when you can visualize what a failure might look like, right? It's not quite so frightening. But if you say, well, I'm going to fail, something might happen that's not good to me, and it's a bad thing, but you haven't dimensionalized how bad it could be or how minor it could be, you you might make decisions that distract you from what you really want to get at. I think, I guess another way of answering that would also to be, how do you also surround yourself with people that you can have as guides, and also someone that you can ask questions of and who can be useful and bouncing ideas off of you. I think that's some of the things. So for instance, I was thinking, and I can get out of Japan, but it's such a cross-cultural experience that I had. I had and the Japanese have, because they're so homogeneous, also have some poor relationships with people of color. And I had a reporter come to me, and it was a reporter from the Japan Times, and he made the point. He said, I'd like to talk to you about what it's like to be an American, Black American in Japan. I know it's terrible. And I said to him, oh no, I'm having a wonderful experience. I've started a business, blah, 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 blah. And he took it, and he couldn't quite understand it, but he took the interview and he gave it. And I remember I was out with friends skiing, and we were in the airport, and someone opened a paper, and it was this big picture of me, and across the headline was "The American Who Can Say Yes to the Japanese." But again, it was turning what he thought was a a problem into a solution. And I like to think that, there are situations when I get to be treated individually, and I use that as well as getting lumped with a group. And so that's how I try and navigate it, to think what is the worst that can happen. And after you think of that, then you can think of all the wonderful things.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Mhm. One of the decisions that I made also was to try and feel free to move into different industries. And so the move to higher education was an interesting one. When I came back from Japan, I continued to run my business for a number of years. And then I decided that I wanted to um, get a doctorate degree. And so while I was in school, I started having conversations with a friend who was at the University of Maryland, and they invited me to be a guest speaker at one of their programs. And it turned out that after a while, I was offered a job to do something that was new and different. And that was my first, and so it was University of Maryland's global college was all over the world. And actually, I had taken classes there when I was in Germany as a young military bride, which is long ago. And it was a different environment because it was all online and nobody was doing a lot online. And I enjoyed the work there, but I'll be honest with you, someone pissed me off. And so after I'd been there maybe about a year and a half, and I decided to put my hat in the ring for a number of other jobs that came in. And I thought, well, maybe the next stage is really about being in a real university, give my career a different spin on it. And I applied to Wright State really because I was sort of pissed, right? But then I got there, and it was a beautiful campus, a nice campus, nice people. And when I decided to make that move, I thought to myself, okay, will being in a traditional university with a traditional campus and traditional ways of hierarchy advance my career? And I thought it did. And so that was the first step when I made yet again another cross category movement. And I moved that from both Wright State. I also went to then I went to Kent State, again, always moving up the chain with a different way. And when I thought of, again, when I thought about moving from Wright State to Kent State, when the offer came to go to Kent State, I'm a baby boomer, right? And I thought, what do I know about Kent State? May 4th and the shootings, that's all I knew about. And I thought, oh my God, this is an organization that is now known by one thing. Is that not a marketer's dream to expand that opportunity? And it turns out that in 2 years of joining that institution, they were going to be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the university and the 45th or 40th anniversary of the shootings on May 4th. And I thought, I can get my hands really all dirty in doing this well. But I think this was one of the first times that I really had the opportunity and the time to be a really good partner with the CEO, right? The person who was running the organization. And it was also the first time that I really spent time in the boardroom, right? And understanding a lot about who are your directors, how are they appointed, what attitudes do they come, how do you manage that governance process? And that for me, I think, was a real big stepping stone. I got to do wonderful things in terms of building the brand, but I think what I also got was the opportunity to really see the full breadth of um, the boardroom, the politics of the boardroom, and the relationship between the board chair, and the CEO, right? And to a lot of extent, you wanted to say, oh, it's the chief of staff's problem. But I was always sort of curious about getting to know the board members and understanding, because they're all interested in marketing, how to get them more engaged in the university and to understand what we were trying to do. And of course, we had this magic moment of the 100th anniversary and May 4th. And one of the things that I set my sights on was that this should be a healing moment for this organization. The only thing that had ever happened from May 4th with all the students that were killed was that uh, some some students had been convicted, and then the case was overturned, and so there was hatred in the community, and people had never healed. And I thought, this will be the brand that I build, a healing moment for the university. And that gave me a great opportunity to work with the community, with the students, with the faculty, and with the administration. And I believe that experience actually made me, while I wasn't thinking in those terms, fully prepared when the opportunity came along to be the CEO of Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio. It was offered. It wasn't something I was thinking about, and I said yes very quickly. I was already on the board, so now I had taken, being the staff, sitting on the side of the room watching the board, to now being a board member and understanding the responsibilities that you have as a board member, and how you interact with the staff, and the fiduciary responsibility you have of helping an organization grow. And so I was happy with that when a CEO that we had recruited, and she'd been there for 3 years and was a great CEO, was like, I've got to go to New York. I'm giving him my notice. By the way, board, you probably have a really great prospect here. And the board started, well, yes, we don't want to search again. And when I thought about it, I'm thinking, this is an advocacy organization. It's not just healthcare. You've got to be able to organize people. You've got to have the development element of it, and you've got to have a lot of fight, and you have to be very thick-skinned. And I thought, do I want all of this? And the answer was yes. The answer was yes. Was I willing to put in the work? The answer was yes. And that has been one of the greatest challenges I think that I've taken, to do that, to recognize that um, I have to have so many constituents that I need to work with. It's not just the board, 10 minutes before I got on this meeting, I was with my board chair, but also with people who are supporters of us, the donors. So it's, um, having that conversation about what is the value proposition of your organization, and having it at both the emotional and the intellectual and financial way that someone wants to open their pocket and give you part of their personal wealth. Um, and then, also, being able to talk to people who are not interested in um, others having body autonomy, and how do you talk to opposition who show no respect for others. It's a very challenging job, but I think when I think back of what prepared me to get here, it's those individual stepping stones. It's in my mind, it's still the willingness to take risks, and to figure out what is the worst that can happen, right? And I have to say, in this job, lots of the worst has happened from a standpoint of the organization. And so I think being resilient has played a big part in being successful, and is something that I rely on a lot. The other thing is you have to have a great leadership team, and I actually was very thoughtful about building the team and understanding their needs and trying to develop them, because you have to have support, and no CEO can do it all along. The other thing I learned, which I think is really important, is that you shape the boardroom, right? As the CEO, one of the most important things is you get a chance to say who is on the board. If you get out of the political things with a governor like DeSantis, right, is appointing who goes on boards. But, I sit on my governance committee, and I say, what here are the expertise, the skills, the mentality, the support that our business needs, right? So here are the business things. We need people who understand healthcare. We need people who, are connected from a political standpoint. We need people who, whatever it is, you identify what the areas are, and your governance committee chair will say, right, so that's the type of board person we need. But then you say, and here are some people that I think would fit, right? So my advice would be, as you think about the board, is to think about how do you build the board that is supportive of your mission, supportive of your success, and someone who can really be an influence in a room. You can't get every board member to be handpicked, but you have to have a number who is that mind melding there, that they are thinking like you, that you can call up in the middle of the afternoon and say, I just need some advice, right? And it's all right. So I did find that building the board representation is extremely important. Spending time with your board members is extremely important for a leader, and it takes an incredible amount of time to do that. But if you do it well, it really is a very big uh, embellishment to your success. You have people who want you to be successful. They want the organization to be successful, and therefore they give very freely. Volunteers, board volunteers, especially in not-for-profits, give a tremendous amount of talent to an organization. So that's been another really big learning experience that I've had that I wouldn't change for the world. And, you can also be that type of person in the boardroom for others. And that's what I would encourage you to think about. What is the experience that you bring that an organization could use? And, I think it's okay to pick a couple of organizations that you think you'd like to be on the board and start networking. Who do you know on the board? What do you know about how they choose board members? How do you raise your hand for them to consider you? Because sometimes you're hiding in plain sight. They don't see you. And ask other people who are on boards, what boards would you suggest? I think board work is one of the most critical things that you can do in terms of also building your career. You're sitting around the table with other leaders, with other decision makers, with people who are connected to other industries. And there's a lot of sharing and camaraderie that goes on there. I want to make sure I
Wonderful advice. Yes, wonderful advice. I think we might have time for just one question to make sure Iris gets off on time and that we all get off on time to get on to, I'm sure, next calls and all of that. Anyone have a burning question? Robin.
Hi, Robin.
I almost am hesitant to ask this question because I feel like it's maybe too basic, but I just am wondering, as I hear what you've done and accomplished, since it's amazing, like, how do you prepare for really difficult conversations, or like, how do you stay in the moment during a different, I hear about these things. I'm like, I'd be a deer in the headlights. I'm just love your thoughts on that.
Well, they go from ranges, like I just had to let a very senior manager go in my organization, right? And I did it with honesty and face to face. And although it was very difficult, I could have had HR and all sorts of people to do it. The first thing she said to me when I told her, um, that we were going to end her employment, she says, "Thank you for telling me face to face personally." So I think, that's one thing. But I would say that if you're talking about the political environment and all the complexity of that, I think one of the ways you prepare for it is recognizing that you don't know it all and you've built a team that has expertise in different areas. So, I never speak to the media without making sure I have my talking points from the experts in my area. I never go to a donor event or speak with a donor without doing the background and having the information. So I think it's the preparation, it's taking the time to get what you need. And also, I think it's important to protect yourself, right? To know that this situation or this type of person or this incident is not where you're going to be your best. And you may not have a decision about whether or not you have to do it, but you can sort of shape what it might look like. Who's in the room with you? When do you meet? Some ground rules for the conversation. That's what I try and do. Make sure that there's a lot of time and preparation in advance. It's a good question. Thanks.
Yes, and in fact, I will plug this. My Betty we are having her, I think in September. She's on this call and she's actually going to talk about how to have hard conversations. So Robin, you'll have to tune in on that one in a couple months. But just want to thank Iris. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your tips on risk taking, and such positive thinking. I know you didn't talk about that directly, but it's something that I admire about you in terms of, you're always looking so positively at
I'm a happy
these.
person.
Yeah, I mean, but it reminds us to think that way. So thank you so much. Thank you
you.
everyone for joining. And we have our next meeting coming up is May 18th, which is a Thursday. We will actually have the CEO of Virginia 529, Mary Morris, joining us. So that will be exciting, talking similar to kind of what Iris, how you led this, talking about finding a job that you're passionate about. That's actually what Mary is going to talk about, as well as using your passion to kind of pave your pathway.
Exactly.
So a lot of things Iris touched on, we kind of have more detailed segments planned in the upcoming months. So thank you
Great. Well,
everyone for
invite
joining.
me.
Yes, I
And
will.
I'm still learning.
I love it.
It's nice
I
to
love
meet
it.
all of you. And for those who are in the area, I hope we can meet face to face sometime.
Yes, Iris is in the DC area. And I can
Definitely.
quickly, I'll put her LinkedIn in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can put my email, and
Okay.
LinkedIn, I'm not as big of a user, and I sort of like text and email.
Okay. Do
Okay.
you want me to use your Gmail account, Iris?
Yeah,
I
you
think
can use my Gmail account. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, because I'm retiring.
All right. Love it.
Thank
I
you.
will share that in the
Thank
chat.
you so much.
Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
nice to meet everyone.
Okay. Bye.